Did you know that your genes can influence how much calcium you absorb from your diet? In this video, I'll explain the process behind it. Calcium is an essential mineral that provides stability to our bones and can help protect us from osteoporosis. About 98% of the calcium in our body is found in our bones. And we can only obtain this mineral from our diet, so consuming the right calcium-rich foods is essential for our bone health. The mineral is absorbed from the intestine through our diet. It also interacts with vitamin D. When both nutrients meet in the intestine, they help each other to be more effectively absorbed into the bloodstream. Once calcium has arrived in the blood, it is transported and integrated into the bones as a stability-providing building block. Calcium deficiency therefore leads to weaker bones and an increased risk of osteoporosis. So calcium is essential for our health, but which foods contain significant amounts of the mineral? There are some plant-based foods that contain a small but still sufficient amount of calcium. These include poppy seeds, sesame seeds, almonds, hazelnuts, kale, soybeans, figs, olives, walnuts, and broccoli. And then there are the calcium super sources, the dairy products. Certain cheese varieties, as well as whole and goat milk, contain large amounts of calcium. And it is precisely these dairy products that we're talking about here. Genes can influence how much of them we consume. Let's take a closer look at this process. The gene in question is the LCT gene. The optimal form of this gene allows us to tolerate dairy products well, and thus there's nothing standing in the way of dairy products being part of our diet. With a balanced diet containing enough dairy products, plenty of calcium ends up in the intestine and is absorbed and utilized. However, there's another side to it. People with specific gene defects in the LCT gene tolerate dairy products poorly and as a result avoid them in their daily diet. Although it is a genetic effect, it usually increases gradually with age. People with this gene defect often avoid dairy products more and more over time, thus consuming less calcium and risk being undersupplied. However, as we've already discussed, there are other ways to get the essential calcium. A diet rich in plant-based calcium sources or calcium supplements can specifically address this deficiency. And now to the question of how common these gene defects actually are. Every person has two copies of the LCT gene, one inherited from the father and one from the mother. It is therefore possible that only one or both genes are defective. This gene has a peculiarity here. A single functioning gene is sufficient to fully take over the necessary function. Thus, around 32% of the population have two functioning genes and 37% have one functional and one defective gene. Both types tolerate dairy products well and tend to consume sufficient calcium through the diet. The remaining 31% have two defective genes. These people often tolerate dairy products increasingly poorly as they age. This also has a negative impact on calcium absorption from food. Therefore, it is especially important for carriers of two defective genes to ensure that they consume enough calcium through their diet, regardless of the source it comes from. And finally, an important point. If you have two defective genes, should you avoid dairy products? The answer is a clear no. Although most people with such genes have difficulty tolerating dairy products in old age, there are some individuals who can still drink milk despite gene defects. So it is not necessary for you to give up your favorite dairy product. However, it does make sense to pay attention to how you feel afterwards. If you develop digestive problems, it might be wise to obtain your calcium from other sources.